Hi everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today we have the pleasure of watching ipeakz from the European server playing in their Tier 7 Italian tank destroyer. It is the SMV CC56. So, unless you've been living under a rock the last couple of weeks, or alternatively, maybe you just haven't even been playing World of Tanks, which is absolutely fine, then you may not know that the Italian tank destroyers have gone into the game, and there have been a lot of them inside the matchmaker. And today, ipeakz is going to show you pretty much perfect CC56 gameplay. But I would also argue that these tanks are amongst the easiest to be able to play, and I think that very, very good players will probably end up becoming quite frustrated, or may I even say bored, by playing them. They just seem as if they're these cookie cutter vehicles that can just sit in front of everything but don't really have any of the downsides. And sometimes it's the pain that you get in World of Tanks that actually means that you have to think outside the box. The Italian tank destroyers are kind of like the French auto-loading tank destroyers with regards to that they have magazines, a very unique prospect for a tank destroyer outside of something like the G-Saw, which is a Tier 8 premium British tank destroyer, which is kind of nothing like any of the other British tank destroyers inside the game. The thing with the Italian tank destroyers is that because they have a very long intraclip reload, but a very short reload to be able to actually get all of the rounds back inside the magazine, they don't have that downside that you would get on the French tank destroyers. And if you're wondering why the outlines are a little bit weird right now, that's because this game was from the previous micro patch, and so just try and ignore the outlines in this replay. I apologize for that. Let me get back on track. Italian tank destroyers just don't really have the complicated downside that the French tank destroyers do, which means that you have to be very much more calculated in your plays with French tank destroyers, and that you can't adapt to the situation. Because after you've bursted out that damage, then you're in the terrible situation of having to hide, or at least survive, for a substantial amount of time before you're ready to go again. The Italian tank destroyers just don't have that. And while I still think that the 18 seconds reload that this vehicle gets, it's not exactly short, but that's kind of the reload on something like an ISU 152K, for example. And that is not the largest amount of downtime which allows your opponents to be able to counter the Italian tank destroyers. When we add to that the fact that they have 10 degrees of gun depression, which kind of allows them to work a ridge line like a medium tank, and also that they have a traversable turret that progressively gets more and more flexible when you make your way up the tech tree. This one, the Tier 7 CC56, has 30 degrees to the left and 30 degrees to the right. But when you get up to the Minotauro, I believe it's 45 degrees to the left and 45 degrees to the right, which is a lot like an FV4-005. This just means that they're not really feeling like they're tank destroyers. They're more kind of like heavy tanks that have a little bit of a downtime. And as I said in my video when I was highlighting the Minotauro last week, tank destroyers are not as competitive as heavy tanks. They are just not as flexible, and because of that, they're not as influential in every situation of the battle. Still, you can get those magical situations where you just get to really unleash your DPM or use your big alpha damage to be able to pick apart your opponent if they sit in front of your gun. But the Italian tank destroyers just blur this line. And as I mentioned in the Minotauro video, tank destroyers have a far worse win ratio if they are matched up consistently against heavy tanks. And my word, these outlines are just completely broken right now. What is that 87 we are even looking at? It's a little bit distracting. Maybe a new tank. It almost looks as if it has kind of like a Soviet turret just lurching off on the 87. Bizarre stuff. And so all of that would probably be enough if it wasn't for the fact that the Italian tank destroyers are also the most heavily armored tank destroyers in the game. And they're more mobile than your traditional super slow, super heavy tank destroyers like the T-95 or something even like a Tortoise. They really are the be-all, end-all of flexibility when it comes to tank destroyers, and even when it comes to just tanks inside the game, which is making them, in my opinion, the most comfortable and easiest to play. Now, I'm not saying that outside of the tier 10 necessarily that they're the most outrageously overpowered. I personally think that the Viper is a very scary vehicle, and I think that it is going to have an outrageous win ratio as we start to get more statistics, as more and more players play them, and maybe a few of the players who also, they can't make the tank work, stop playing the vehicle, and then the people who do enjoy the vehicle and can make it work continue to play it, which is definitely going to elevate its statistics. I can tell you, in fact, I can tell you that I was going to alt-tab there and I realized, why would I do that? Because ipeakz is about to go to town on this VK and this ARL. The Minotauro is already packing a 53% average win ratio at tier 10, cementing it in #1 place with regards to win ratio of any of the tier 10 tank destroyers. Now, again, while it is early days for the Minotauro, and undoubtedly as more of the casual players get their hands on it, and a lot more of the sweaty nerds who are probably trying to race to get their 3rd mark of excellence on the Minotauro don't play it so much, that the win ratio will gravitate down. Although I do expect, seeing how I've played the Minotauro now from my Tech Tree Showcase last weekend, and I've played it quite a lot over the subsequent few days of gameplay since then, that the thing is just absolutely outrageous, boys and girls. I would be very surprised if I couldn't continue at least a 65, if not a 70% win ratio playing that tank playing solo. But maybe it's early days and maybe I'm just getting really lucky. It just feels like it is that powerful. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, let's focus on ipeakz gameplay now that I've given you the reason why the Italian tank destroyers are the easiest to play and why they're just being so darn influential. And that is that ipeakz momentarily found themselves in a 1 versus 6, which they've now turned into a 1 versus 4. They've already managed to vanquish 5 enemy tanks, but they're going to have to deal with another 3 tanks and a self-propelled gun and finish the game with 9 kills if they want to be able to take this one down. And it just looks so comfortable. And I agree. Look at NKJ in the chat. Lol, he kill all, relax. And in this kind of situation, I would kind of agree with him. The only concern, really, that ipeakz has is that if they expose the lower plate of the CC56, and that is undoubtedly a big weak point on this tank. But as long as you can avoid your opponents from getting your side and expose that lower plate, and you can control the engagement with the autoloader without the downside of having a long reload after you've fired out the 305mm shells that this vehicle has, then ipeakz has definitely got a great chance here. On this map, Empire's Border, it's definitely a map where I feel that you've got a very good chance of winning these 1 versus many situations, because it's all focused, it's all narrow pathways, but also you do have long lines of vision which you can set ambushes up against your opponents. This is also a map which quite often gets capped out very quickly. I'm sure a lot of you have noticed that when you've been playing on this map. When 3 enemy vehicles get into your cap circle, you've got absolutely no chance to be able to get back. ipeakz is going to avoid that by making sure that he is defending his cap circle, and as long as the enemy do have to commit, which I guess they have to if they want to be able to win the game and for it to not end up in a draw, if ipeakz is willing to let that happen, then to all intents and purposes, ipeakz is doing the right thing right now by just protecting the cap circle and expecting the 3 tanks that were last spotted to be able to come after him. The only danger that you present by playing like this is it does allow the enemies to strategize. It does allow them to change their positions and possibly be able to develop a pincer attack on you. Also, the more time that you give to self-propelled guns in this situation, the more likely it is that they're going to find an angle to be able to bombard you. And any kind of vision from any of the vehicles on the enemy team, maybe the opposite number, the CC56, the T25AT, or even the Basoto, which you have to play through to be able to get this vehicle, could end up spelling doom for ipeakz here, considering that self-propelled gun. And while the Italian tank destroyers do have that frontally focused armor, yet they are pretty big chunky targets to hit from above, and they don't take self-propelled guns very well if they are managing to land their shells on top of the tank. So ipeakz is using his gamer senses right now. They must be tingling, expecting that, well, if they're not going to come from the front, maybe they're coming from the rear. And perfect. ipeakz predicts that the Basoto is going to be flanking, and now it's only a matter of time before he hides his lower plate, hopefully from the Basoto, and has a nice easy time of dealing with them. But oh my word, an artillery comes around the corner. Luckily, this tank does have an autoloader and enough alpha damage to be able to shut down the AMX in a single shot if they didn't low roll. And ipeakz turns now his 1 versus 6 into a 1 versus 2. But makes the mistake of reloading APCR rounds here, where they've only got 2 rounds of ammunition. And a low roll here, or even they need 2 rounds to be able to go after the C56 here, should definitely focus on the Italian TD. But as we can see, it's not so funny when both of the tanks are OP, right? And that means that ipeakz is unable to find a shot into the lower plate of the CC56. Instead, he's going to go for the T25AT and finish them off. Now he's going to reload, and I really like this play. The worst thing that you could do would be try to connect that shell and maybe take a hit from the CC56. Although, I really don't like that play. Why would you push around the corner and give them a chance when you're reloading? Just relax, stay hidden, and then use your hit points to hopefully close the distance against a vehicle that looks like it's got the stock turret, albeit that it is got gold rounds left. And I do think that ipeakz in this scenario probably could have been able to go through the turret, the stock turret of the CC56, especially the mantlet to the left and the right of the tank, but they don't need to, as ipeakz literally takes down probably the most casual 1 versus 6 Kolobanov's medal that I have ever seen, giving a little love to, unfortunately, the stock tank on the enemy team. But I do like NKJ on their team, saying, "I told you, he'll get them all, be my hero, ha 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 ha." It's always lovely in these kind of situations when you do see the team getting behind the hero of the battle. In this case, it was ipeakz. And undoubtedly, ipeakz played this battle fabulously, flawlessly, did everything right. Did it look fancy? Did it look absolutely outrageous? No. These are not your wild, stylish tanks. They're not vehicles which are going to be fun and flashy, but that they also undoubtedly are about as meta as it gets, and they get the job done, just like ipeakz here. So how have Wargaming done with balancing the Italian tank destroyers? Well, again, let me add the caveat that it's early days for all of the reasons that I talked about in the video, but as we can see, the Minotauro is packing an over 53% average. I think that is outrageously good. The tier 9 is just shy of 51. The Vipera is actually at 50.59, which really surprised me. I did not think that the Vipera was going to have such a poor win ratio. I mean, come on, it's still got the 4th best win ratio of any of the tank destroyers that you can actually purchase. But I genuinely thought that this vehicle would be outperforming the TS5. Maybe a whole wide breadth of players have got this vehicle. Maybe they're training up crews for the Italian TDs. Maybe they're not setting the vehicle up correctly. But it is definitely below my expectations as to where I thought it would be. It's still not bad, not by a long shot. 50.59% average win ratio, and it is a top 4 tank destroyer when you take into account that the ISU 130 and the KV4 KTS doesn't really exist on the EU server. When it comes down to the tier 5, the 6 and the 8, it looks like Wargaming have pretty much hit the nail on the head with regards to how balanced they are, with each of the vehicles averaging about 49% win ratio, which is perfect when you take into account that the game has about 2% draws. And so, while I personally don't think that the addition of the Italian tank destroyers has at least made the game any more fun, it's undoubtable that maybe if you're a casual player or a heavy tank player who's always wanted to have the flexibility of a heavy tank, but maybe just pack a little bit more firepower like a tank destroyer, that these ones may be the vehicles for you. But if you're expecting flashy, fast-paced, exciting gameplay where you're living by the skin of your teeth, yeah, I probably want to avoid these ones. So ipeakz secured the one that everybody wants, the Kolobanov's medal, for standing alone against at least 5 opponents in their tier 7 Italian TD, a Radley Walters medal for picking up 9 frags, and a high caliber for 6,691 damage dealt, over 4 times what anyone else on their team was able to achieve, even their fan for the game in the form of NKJ. And while I really didn't like the fact that ipeakz just spammed gold at the beginning of the game, it also made it quite awkward for them possibly towards the latter part of the battle when they started to run out of APCR rounds and they had that awkward magazine in that 1 versus 2 finish. I think when you nail 2,193 base experience, you probably don't care about losing 24,000 credits in a game of World of Tanks, especially when you're probably progressing up the tech tree. So ipeakz, congratulations to you and thank you for uploading the game on the whatreplays.eu website, and also thank you for putting my name in the title to get my attention, to know that you wanted to be featured on the channel. I enjoyed the simplicity and the brutality of this game. You obviously look like an exceptional player. And if you end up watching this video, ipeakz, let me know in the comments down below whether you're actually enjoying the Italian tank destroyers or whether you find them a little bit boring after a while, because you do seem like a great player who would probably lust for a little bit more. Anyway, ladies and gents, boys and girls, that's it for today. Really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And let me know in the comments if you're surprised about the Italian tank destroyers statistics. Did you expect the tier 7, the 9 and the 10 to be performing so exceptionally well, with the Minotauro a whole 1.5% average above the 268 version 4? But once again, it's early days for the tank. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.